Welcome to the panel discussion, Conservation Ethos and Life Below Water. And this is going to be a discussion in the context of the Academy Award winning film, My Octopus Teacher. And this program is organized by the Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries, University of Kerala. And the moderator of this panel discussion is Professor Meena Pillai, Dean Faculty of Arts and Professor of English, University of Kerala. And she is also the Director of Center for Culture Studies in University here. And she's a former Fulbright visiting professor, University of California, Los Angeles, and she is specialized in gendered nationalism in Indian and Canadian cinema, in mass media, and specialized in cinema. That's why she is here as the moderator of this discussion. And also, unlike a panel discussion in the media, here we have three women adding special flavor to the discussion today: Dr. Meena Pillai and Swati Foster, a conservation journalist, a filmmaker with a long experience of working with Indian media, and she's a lead speaker. And another marine biologist and environmentalist, Dr. Dipani Sutharya, Dr. Sanjay, Molur, conservation expert, writer, speaker. He is from Zoo Outreach Organization. And Mr. Shekhar Dettari, a well-known and award-winning wildlife filmmaker. And Kalyan Verma, an outstanding photographer and wildlife filmmaker of India, who may join us if he is in range of internet as he is in fieldwork. On behalf of the university, I welcome you all, and I welcome all the participants. And now it's over to Dr. Meena.
Thank you, Dr. Biju. It's a pleasure for me to be here for various reasons. First of all, I really love the film. But more than that, there are so many other things that, as we move along, I thought I would add. As all of you would know, I'm a teacher, and I have nothing in common with a cephalopod that has three hearts. I don't know whether this is true. This is something that I read up: blue blood, no bones, 8 limbs attached to a bulbous head. That is why I was hooked to the title of My Octopus Teacher, this immensely popular nature documentary on Netflix. Most of us are on the OTT platforms now for cinema. So anyway, but then it was a blessing because I was able to watch the documentary itself. Moreover, as a travel buff, to be transported to the exotic and remote locale of Cape Town, South Africa, added charm. But then, more than that, this documentary came in an age when we in Kerala are losing our shores, our environment to corporate agendas. Therefore, along with Craig Foster and his crew, the documentary took me on a journey to seek solace in the ocean, an ocean that surrounds the Malayali, in Kerala, an ocean that is seminal to our origin stories, our myths and folklore, as also our contemporary realities. There is always a kind of a deep bond of empathy that we in Kerala, for example, have shared with nature in many other parts of India too. Our pantheistic belief systems. As far as Kerala is concerned, our Kaur tradition, the green groves where we thought our gods resided and our spiritual connection with them were installed. Probably this is why, invoking those traditions, the film evoked a deeply spiritual, mystical experience. Hard to feel something like that these days, where the profound wheel of life turns and turns to finally give us moksha, salvation from the eternal cycle of birth and death. The end, when the octopus slowly merges with the life around her, becomes food to others, lives on in 1,000 bodies. I thought of how, along with the Bible, just as the Bible points out, humans are also dust, returning to dust to animate the world once again. But what struck me most as an academic was how the documentary used a multidisciplinary methodology. That's why I kept on posting in my student groups and my faculty groups that, this film somehow has touched me deeply at multiple levels. It's a very interesting kind of a multidisciplinary methodology. What was narrated or what was being narrated was science, but it deftly borrowed a storytelling mode, evoking deeply affective structures of narration. That's what I mean. It touched a chord in each and every one of us, precisely because it was so effective. This is where science, I think, also benefits from myth, from narratology, using affective fallacies to very positive ends. I did look online, and people seem to be slightly critical about the anthropomorphism that was part and parcel of the film. But then anthropomorphism might definitely be an issue we have to reckon with, where human characteristics are projected to nature. But it was very interesting the way this happened in the film, the kind of bond that happened between the narrator and the octopus, the way we project things onto our own emotions to animals or to objects. But my question in return would be, why not? Why not anthropomorphism? When the rationality of science, its critical rigor and empirical value are not enough or are proving to be inadequate in addressing our environmental crisis. And if anthropomorphism can address the issue and bring in a sea change with a pun on the word, then so be it. The distortion of scientific knowledge, I think, within these permissible limits, if harnessed to a higher goal, seems perfectly okay to me. Maybe even it is a need of the time. In a post-truth world, when everything is modulated by opinions and beliefs rather than fact, there seems to be a logical and strategical ploy, if I may call it that. So if anthropomorphism serves conservation when many things else are not, then so be it, is what I would say. Maybe this rather porous boundary between the human and the non-human is what needs to be underlined to unsettled, received anthropocentric notions with its extremely problematic environmental ethics, which is in many ways the root evil of our ecological crisis. So in our drive towards a new humanistic, ecological conception of the relationship between humans and nature, what is most needed is a shift in attitude with a philosophy of ecology that foregrounds a more inclusive scientific perspective. A human ecosystem science, if I can call it that, which views humans as being components of a larger whole. So this is what my octopus teacher achieved, at least for me as a spectator, as a lay spectator, by revealing a kind of a planetary scientific perspective, where the octopus and I would say an I that is spelled with, not with a capital letter, but a small letter, that small I. That octopus and I are connected components or links in a unifying concept of ecology. Thus, ecology is not a human ecology. This is something that I wanted to stress. And this is what this is the kind of transformation that I underwent after watching the film. It is not a human ecology. It is an ecology that is shared by all inhabitants, octopus, kelp, and me alike. So it is this complex web of mythical, of metaphysical, of epistemological, of ethical beliefs that this documentary touches in its moments of brilliance. As a film scholar, as a student of cinema, from a filmic point of view, the documentary definitely, as all of you would vouch, is a visual spectacle, a treat for the eyes, capturing the nuanced layers of the ocean, the surreal kelp topography, the vivacity of the life in it. Of course, the filmic experience is a sensory ensemble. And here too, not only visually, but at the auditory, even a perception of the sensory, the way the tentacles touch, not just the narrator, but extends to the spectator. So I think the film incorporated specific recording technologies. I'm not an expert here. Not only recording technologies, but also techniques that allowed the creators to give the media an embodied kind of an embodied character. I was thinking of the works of people like Merleau-Ponty, who stress upon how, from a phenomenological perspective, there is an embodied camera. That is, an embodied camera always has to be an interactive camera. So this is something that I felt as I was watching the documentary again and again, the kind of interactiveness that the camera was trying to engender. That interactiveness seems to be part of the project of the documentary itself. The relationship between the sensory media, the camera and the sound equipments, even the eye, the human eye, and the interactions through engagements with ocean life, I would call all of that exemplary. In that way, I would say the film was a sensory ethnography. I don't know whether anybody would work on this. It was a sensory ethnography of the ocean. I'll not take any longer. I don't want to take any much more time than this, but I would only say to the crew, to the people who were part of this film, a huge thank you for giving an effective turn to science, a sensory turn to literature, and an ethical turn to cinema, which together would contribute to the larger discourse of eco-conservation. A teacher definitely affects eternity. One can never tell when her influence stops. That is what my octopus teacher did to me as a teacher. It taught me the infinite fragility of not just my existence, but of all that animates the universe. Maybe the fragility of the universe itself. I'll not come in between the panel of eminent speakers who are here to speak to you. We have Swati Foster, conservation journalist, filmmaker, author, and associate producer of My Octopus Teacher. I cannot thank you enough, Swati, for a film like this. Swati is also the member of Sea Change Project, consulting editor for environment at NDTV, and a number of other things. We also have Dr. Sanjay Molur, conservationist, executive director, Zoo Outreach Organization, a passionate wildlifer, versatile conservation biologist, who is also the founder and secretary of the Wildlife Information Liaison Development, WILD. He's the co-chair of 5 species specialist groups, runs 2 networks for reptile and amphibian researchers in South Asia, was part of the international panel that refined the IUCN rate. Another member who would be joining us, if he's not here already, is Dr. Dipani Sutharya, who's a marine biologist and an environmentalist, an ecologist interested in biogeography. I find that fascinating, that field of biogeography, behavioral ecology, and urban ecology. She's an adjunct senior research fellow at JCU, Australia, and a visiting faculty at CEPT, Ahmedabad. Shekhar Dattatri is a wildlife and conservation filmmaker in India. His first film, A Cooperative for Snake Catchers, won the National Award in 1987 for Best Scientific Film. He has also 2 very significant documentaries to his credit, Seeds of Hope and Silent Valley, which again went on to win several international awards. Another speaker would be Kalyan Verma, wildlife photographer, filmmaker, naturalist, and explorer, dedicated to documenting wildlife and the environmental issues that define our times. He freelances with many of the world's leading magazines, environmental NGOs, and television channels like Nat Geo and BBC. So this would be the panel that we have. Welcome to each one of you, a very, very warm welcome. The University of Kerala, I think, is lucky. It's a proud moment for us to be along with a panel of this eminence. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would welcome Swati. Could you please make the first comments of yours? Thank you.
Thank you, Meena. That was a very sensitive and deep, beautiful critique of the film. I think a lot of what you said, in fact, all of what you said at various times were thoughts, ideas, issues that came up when we were talking. This was when we were physically sitting down to actually edit the film because we had so much material. So let me just start a little bit with the background of where it began. This was almost now almost 11, 12 years ago when Craig was sort of burnt out in a sense and really exhausted because we did a whole lot of films together in the space of, I think, 2009 and 2010 and 2011, 12. He did almost 4 big international projects. And anyone who's a filmmaker having to deal with international producers and the production companies and the deliverables and having, if you get paid to make a film, you know the kind of stress that's on you, especially when you're making a wildlife film, because you can't guarantee you'll always get what you see. So he'd made this series of films on crocodiles in the Okavango in Botswana, and we'd made a film called The Animal Communicator together, and we were doing a series together. And I think a lot of it had just like sort of piled upon him, and he kind of hit like an exhaustion, burnout kind of situation, which led to a level of anxiety, depression, etc. So at that point, he put his camera down as a filmmaker and said he didn't want to do that anymore. And he just really was missing the fact that even though he was making films on nature and conservation and wildlife, the actual process of making the films and dealing with all of this was taking him away from being in nature and in conservation and with wildlife. So with that in mind, and with his experience with the San people that he'd spent 3-4 years in the Kalahari with, making his first film, The Great Dance, he sort of went back to what was the space that gave him a lot of solace and a lot of inspiration, and that's the ocean. It's where he's been since he was a child. So when he started filming and when he was in the kelp forest here, it was just that. He was literally just going in every day to get used to the cold water, to sort of make it a practice. It almost became like a practice, as people would do with yoga or meditation or exercise or anything. As most people have a practice, that was his practice, going into the ocean. He also went in a way where he went in wanting to learn and wanting to immerse in the way that he'd seen the San people do in their environment. Because here he realized that for a lot of people, being in nature was very much just you just went and then you came out. You didn't kind of connect to the fact that you are always in nature because you yourself are nature as the human animal. So for him, it was that shift and wanting to be in that space and to understand that as the natural home became sort of like key. So when he was filming, and he was filming the kelp forest and filming the animals he saw there, taking photographs, all of it, and learning to track underwater by applying what he'd learned from the San people when it came to tracking on land, there was at that point zero idea that this was ever going to be a project or anything. Initially, it was just a lot of photographs. He started to train with the emeritus professor of marine biology here in Cape Town. He would go with Professor Charles Griffiths every day, almost into the intertidal, into the ocean, just to learn about what was happening in that marine environment, in the kelp forest environment. And so he started recording that as in photographs. He started learning those animals. He started learning behavior. He started understanding that environment. And so much of that became part of a practice that he did and filming. So it was almost 2-3 years into that process that he met the octopus. And even when he met her and he started filming her and tracking her, again, there was at that point, also zero idea that it was going to be a film, because you couldn't guarantee. How would anyone ever know that an octopus was going to stay and interact with you for as long as she chose to stay and interact with Craig? So it was almost 5 years into the process of being in the ocean, and much after his whole interaction with the octopus, when he'd brought out a book called Sea Change and the Primal Art of Underwater Tracking. It's a coffee table book on the kelp forest with a friend who also became the co-founder of the Sea Change project. It was when that book came out and Craig started to do talks and was then looking through his material to do presentations about this ecosystem, that we suddenly were looking at all of that material and we thought, oh my God, like that, it kind of clicked, like there is this story, there's this incredible story that can be told. So that's really how it came about. Once Craig kind of started thinking that there was a story that he could tell, then Pippa came on board. Pippa had already been swimming and diving and learning to track and be in the water with Craig by that point for almost 6 months. And then when he thought about this, he sent her a treatment and a write-up for the film and asked her, would she be interested in working on it with him? And she just basically dropped her job and everything and came on board to do this because she was so inspired by what she'd read. And once Pippa came on board, then that whole process of making it into a film began. When you make the film, and obviously, like, there were two things we kept very close in mind. One is we knew that we had to base it on the science, because that was very important for us to get the facts right, because this was a new ecosystem for a lot of people around the world. Most people do not know what kelp forests are. Most people do not know that 1/4 of our world's coastlines have kelp forests. Most people don't understand what an underwater sea forest actually even looks like. Most people don't understand that the ocean, which people just see as a large body of water, is actually a massive sort of patchwork quilt of various different systems that then form to become the ocean. No one patch of ocean is like any other patch of ocean. It is all alive, it's different, it functions differently, and all of it works together as the world's oceans. So in order to get people, because when you talk oceans to most people, or when you say oceans, there are two things for the layperson that will always come up in their imagination. One is sharks, and the other is coral reefs. Coral reefs is the one ecosystem within the ocean most people recognize, because there's been a lot of attention, and as it should be, on coral reefs. And that is what made the Great Barrier Reef such an iconic kind of ecosystem for most people. You could live anywhere in the world. You may never have dived or swum, but if you're remotely interested in conservation or wildlife or any of it, most people will know. If I say the Great Barrier Reef, they'll know what I'm talking about. But if I say kelp forest, maybe people who actually live near a kelp forest, like in California or British Vancouver, South America, or wherever in the world you find kelp forest, maybe some people who live on the coast near the forest would have heard of kelp forests, but they actually wouldn't know what it looks like underneath the waves unless they've actually physically dived themselves. And people living in those countries with kelp forests on their coast will not know what it is, and which was the case here, as we found out in South Africa. Even in Cape Town, most people did not know what a kelp forest is or was, or how much, how extensive it is as an ecosystem. Nothing. So we realized that we have this extraordinary biodiverse ecosystem on our doorstep, an ecosystem that has a very ancient linkage to who we are as the human animal. So 200,000 years ago, it was on this coast that the modern human mind, about 150,000 years ago, actually formed. It was on this coast of South Africa, along this stretch of kelp forest, caves in which our ancestors had, even now, as in paleoarchaeology evidence will show you, the first art, the first engraving on a little piece of ochre, which was the first time the human animal thought of putting a pattern they may have had in their mind out of their mind onto a piece of stone, which was a hugely significant leap for us to make at the time in our evolution, because there is no other animal, singularly no other animal on the planet, that takes a pattern that's in its head and represents it outside symbolically. The beginning of symbolic culture, it happened here. And it was the beginning of symbolic culture that made us the modern human. So the first evidence of art, the first evidence of chemistry, the first evidence of symbolic modern human culture as we know it, started right here on these coasts. And the people who lived there, our ancestors, would have hunted and gathered on this coast, and the kelp forest, with its during low tide, especially with its rich variety of shellfish and fish and food, would have been a great resource for them, because at low tide you can wade in and not fear drowning. The kelp itself is such a buoyant plant because it's a gas-filled stipe that floats to the surface of the ocean. When you are in the water and you are swimming amongst the kelp, or you're lying on it, you feel very buoyant. You feel like you're being left, it's like a flotation device almost. So that would have also made people feel a lot more secure to enter the ocean in spaces where there were kelp forests as opposed to the larger ocean. So, and we have found evidence in these same caves in layer after layer of various animals that these people would have eaten that came from the kelp forest. So this is the kind of almost 10,000 generation ancestral heritage that every single human on the planet today has with the kelp forest, because it was these people who became the modern human on this coast, who then left Africa 60,000 years ago in the biggest and most successful push out of Africa to migrate and go to the rest of the world. So this became very, very so this is the backstory. It's not in my Octopus Teacher film, but it's the backstory to what this ecosystem means for us as South Africans in terms of marine and cultural heritage, but also to the world of what this is. It's called the heart of the world. That's what this place is called. It's called the heart of the world. So when we made the film, we had to keep the kelp forest as a backdrop. At that point, Craig had also set up the Sea Change Project. So our big goal was to make the Great African Sea Forest as iconic and as recognizable as the Great Barrier Reef or the Serengeti or the Mara. And then we wanted to tell a story that would be personal enough that everyone could relate to it. But at the same time, we had science in it. So there's a very old quote that says that science tells you why you need to do something, but storytelling makes you want to do it. So that's the marriage between science and storytelling that I personally think is key, that all of us in Sea Change Project believe is key, which is why we call ourselves storytellers for ocean conservation, very much based on science. So this was sort of the background from which my Octopus Teacher was made. And of course, it's an incredibly personal story of Craig's relationship with this incredible animal. To point towards the anthropomorphism, it wasn't so much that we wanted the octopus to appear human. It is that to make it intimate and for the human to interpret what she could or would or possibly be doing, because there's no way to tell what an octopus is thinking or doing. You can only project or understand through your own lenses and interpretation. So that interpretation is the part of it that where the human aspect came in. And in telling that story, I think our biggest challenge was, okay, now there's this extraordinary story, there's this extraordinary ecosystem, we have all these wonderful visuals, we knew we had a winning story, but when it came to rounding out the end of the film, would we just leave it as we did when she died, and moving on to Craig with our son in the water and him finding the baby octopus, sort of exactly as Professor Meena said about the fact that it's not like it's dead, full stop. It's about that cycle of life, that eternal sort of cycle that goes on, and how every creature, there is no such thing as waste in nature. It's a very human concept, and it's how this cycle goes on. And it's again in human time and in human interpretation, we ring fence things and go, this is the experience I had, because we're the ones stuck in past, present, and future, not the fellow animal beings that share the planet with us. So one of the big debates was, what kind of conservation message do we embed in the film, and how? So do we have an overt conservation message? Do we talk about octopus fishing, for example? Do we talk about how octopuses are trapped? Do we talk about how in the process of trapping octopuses in these sort of octopus traps, whales were getting entangled and killed sometimes? Do we talk about octopuses being eaten all over the world? And then after much back and forth and debating, we decided that we weren't going to embed an overt conservation message in the film, because we felt that the story we told, if we could get to people through their heart, we could then reach their minds. And what has been really interesting for us to learn post that is the film made so many people curious that on their own, they went and found out about octopus fisheries and octopuses and how they were trapped and how sentient octopuses are. And I've lost count of the thousands of emails, simply hundreds of thousands of emails and messages that we've gotten with people saying they will never eat an octopus again. We've gotten messages from people saying how we inspired, these are some younger people, that we inspired them to become marine biologists. We got messages from people saying how they were spending more time in nature, not necessarily in the ocean. They were finding their own space around them wherever they were, to just have that connection to nature. And so for us, that was the most extraordinary thing, is that is what we set out to do. We really wanted to reach people's hearts, to get to their minds. And the fact that we did that and, stayed away from the very conventional idea of if it's a wildlife or a nature film, then it has to have a very overt conservation message, which was a bit of a gamble that we took, but it worked. But I also think that some of the ideas in the film, from immersing in nature to deep ecology, to ethology, to the idea that there is no separation, that wild places and wild animals are precious, the understanding that we as the human animal belong. These were all very, very important topics, issues, ideas that we didn't think there was enough being done about in the space of wildlife and nature filmmaking. And we thought, let's do this, because this is equally important. So that's how the film came about. Yeah.
Thank you, Swati. That was, I'm sure it was very interesting what you said about that coast itself and so many other minute details. I'm sure we'll be taking it up for discussion. But over to you, Sanjay Molur. Would you be able to join in? And yeah, you're there. Yeah, welcome. Yeah.
Hi again. I think the introduction given by Professor Meena was excellent, and I sort of identify with all of those comments that you made. And listening to Swati just gave this perspective of what we'd seen, what we enjoyed, and really brought to life the happenings behind the scenes. Now, it's just, yes, we understand some of the things that Craig narrates, and we can fall back on his narration to identify what's going on with him, to have prodded this entire production, and the way it's come out is really wonderful. I can go on, but Swati, I think you just laid it all out there. There's very little that I can add to it, but what I would say is, from the perspective of how science was communicated, was excellent. And I completely agree with you that, and with Professor Meena, that science is not just something that is relatable to everyone. And so the way it is expressed makes a lot of difference. In this day and age, when we are actually battling a whole lot of different kinds of attitudes and perceptions, especially with conspiracy theories, with everything else, and there's the backlash on science itself. This movie, I felt, was a wonderful way of putting that perspective out to people and let them then take on and explore for themselves, which I'm very happy to learn from you, Swati, that many people got back to you saying that they were inspired by it and got to do their own research about Octopus. I think that's a great storytelling in by itself. And I wish we could incorporate more of these things into the communications that we do. To me, it had a personal effect in terms of what we all go through in conservation, being immersed in conservation on a daily basis. This is who we are. This is our career. This is our sort of life in it. And we are not into something else that we look at nature once in a while, but we are in nature all the time. And we are constantly exposed to the denigration of nature, of the degradation that's happening around us, to everything that is going against nature itself, which not only impacts the nature, but everything else that is dependent on it and is contributing to it, including all the different species and us humans also. It creates a huge pressure in us. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm constantly under pressure from what's happening around us. This movie, I could sort of identify with Craig. Perhaps he had other pressures, as you mentioned, from filmmaking itself. But what I could see was a certain amount of eco-anxiety that was involved in this entire making. Rather, the movie helping him get over his eco-anxiety. putting myself in his shoe, sort of helped me understand a lot of it, and watching the little 200 square meter of kelp forest and thing that he was looking at brought such pleasure. Yes, we know that the ocean out there is so huge. We also know that the effects of all the different things that humans do to the oceans is really, really stark. And the climate crisis is just adding on to it. But finding these small pockets of real joy is something that we need to absorb. As conservationists, perhaps take some solace, find joy, and communicate to the outside world in a way that Craig has done and you people have done in terms of how to get out there. So it's a lot of lessons to be learned for me as a science communicator, for me as a communicator of both popular science and hardcore peer-reviewed science. I sort of feel with it, and there's a lot of takeaway for me to go on in terms of strategies. I really like the way he called them the forest, and referring to disappearing into the mist. I mean, come on. I mean, forest and mist is so terrestrial, but within an ocean, referring to a misty forest is something puts you out there.
Let me just show you. See, that's the misty forest right
Absolutely.
behind me. That's what it looks like. You could that could be dusk in a forest somewhere. Just with light coming through. Doesn't necessarily have to be underwater.
Yeah. No, I mean it's amazing. Yeah. How many of us are actually exposed to underwater scenes? Very few. And so it's lovely to see that something like that is compared to more of a terrestrial environment, which we can all relate to. And so that's another way of great way of communicating, and I really enjoyed that. It touches upon animal behavior, which is fantastic. It touches upon human emotions, the connections between humans and animals, and taking this as a one-on-one experience, I think is a very different take. Yes, we've seen one-on-one takes with, say, domestic animals. We see that in this day and age of all social media with cats. Yes, a lot of people relate to animals one-on-one, but taking an octopus, a wild creature, a creature that he refers to again as being there in existence for several million years, which again is an aspect that puts people thinking. It makes people to think about the perspective of not only evolution, but the longevity of life on Earth. Okay, he refers to the animal for being there for millions of years. We all know what it means, but just wording it that way has a special effect. So again, I was really touched by that. I feel that the entire approach was very well done. It is holistic enough for me to have taken on quite a few pointers from that to help perhaps myself and my team and others out there who are trying to communicate to people on how to incorporate more of the anthropocentric kind of outlook. And this is where, Professor Meena, what you said actually reverberated a lot with this entire thing. Plus, how we need to communicate with people, and that's the only way to go about. I myself have made huge changes to how I see communication, science communication, from being a hardcore scientist to saying, this is how it should be looked at, to understand people's perceptions and perspectives and to project it from their point of view. I've had to make a huge change to the way I look at things. So this again, seeing that this is communicated, this story so well, it's made me much more of a fan. Um, Cognition, intelligence, a lot of us think humans are the only intelligent species, but hey, you're talking of a mollusk, and you're talking of other creatures that have other kinds of intelligence, that have, so very well expressed. More than 70%, 80% of the cognition lies outside of the brain in the octopus, which is an amazing fact. Do we show the same kind of cognition? Perhaps, but do we recognize it as it being outside of our brains? Perhaps not. So this is a great way of putting across, and I think these are little things that really, really help me personally. And I was watching this movie with my parents, and they really appreciated it. So I know that it reached out to them. They have absolutely no background in wildlife, and so I know, at least from a very small sample size, that people outside of the scientific community that I have interacted with really did appreciate the movie and like it. And so great, hats off, and fantastic movie, and very well thought out and communicated science. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you. Thank you. Can we have you, Shekhar Dattatri?
Yeah, I'm going to speak about it more as a filmmaker. And I actually saw this film twice when I was on the judging panel of Wildscreen 2020. And for those who might not know, Wildscreen is one of the most prestigious wildlife film festivals in the world. And it's one of the longest running film festivals as well. And under normal circumstances, and the film won the Best of Festival Golden Panda Award. Under normal circumstances for a filmmaker, this would be the pinnacle of achievement. But then this film has blown past all that and went on to win an Academy Award, which is just historic. There's no other word for it. The film won many, many awards in Jackson Hole, which is another prestigious film festival in the US. So it's just broken all kinds of ceilings. So huge congratulations to Swati and the entire team for what I think is a breakthrough film. And I've been on several juries before, and the top award is usually very hotly contested. And what I can say, Swati, is that in this case, it was a very easy choice. We didn't fight very much. And funny thing is, as Swati very properly put it in the earlier discussion that we had before the program started, with festivals, it can be hit or miss. It's about the subjectivity of each juror. So you don't know what's going to actually finally make it. But like I said, there was so much unanimity as far as this film was concerned. And I want to pay 3 particular compliments to this film. I want to say that so universal is the appeal of this film that it would have won the Golden Panda irrespective of which 5 people had been judging it. It wouldn't have made any difference. So I had a very, very small part to play. I was just a proxy for millions of people voting enthusiastically for this film, which anybody would have chosen as the best of festival. It was a no-brainer. I would also like to say that, state the obvious in a way, to say that anybody who sees this film will never see octopuses in the same way again. Absolutely. So in that way, this is a very, very transformational film, which you can't say about too many films in the world, whether it's feature films or documentaries. You can't use the word transformational about too many films. The third thing I would like to say in appreciation of this film is that despite its length, it left you craving more, which is again something you can't say about very many films. You usually want to, want a documentary to end, especially say enough, enough is enough, get on with it. And here you felt that, hey, show me more. Is this it? How are we getting out of the story? So it was just, it's just such a magical film. And during the judging, I watched it twice, and the first time I watched it, I finished watching it, and I thought, this is a black swan, and for those who might not be familiar with the term black swan is a metaphor that describes an event that, comes as a huge surprise and has a major effect. So I've been making wildlife documentary films for 35 years. And I have watched hundreds and hundreds of films. I've been to festivals many, many times. And there have been a few outstanding films, but this just takes it to a completely different level. So it's something so extraordinary because you have the run-of-the-mill documentary, which is how something is born, how it dies, how it breeds, how it mates. It's the same formula ad nauseum. And this one is a film that cannot be defined in any way. It can't be put in any particular box because it just goes into all sorts of boxes and out of all sorts of boxes, right? And it touches the core of your soul, which is ultimately what every film has to do. Because today, with the kind of cameras and equipment that people have, every film is technically perfect. In fact, I wouldn't say that every shot was technically perfect here, but that's the kind of refreshing rawness also that you need, because in a documentary, if everything is so clinically slick, it robs it of life. It robs it of soul. And I like the organic quality of this film. That feeling of being there in the kelp forest for 1.5 hours or whatever the length of this film is. I mean, I lost count of time. You just got suspended for the time that you watch this film. And the best way I can characterize this film, and I said this to my fellow judges, and I don't know whether it ended up in the final citation or not, that this film is like E.T. meets Avatar, because the octopus is such a bizarre creature that it could easily be a creature from outer space. For all that we know about it, it could easily be from another planet, So it could be a version of Steven Spielberg's E.T. And the kelp forest is a perfect analogy for the amazing scenery we saw in the moons of Pandora in James Cameron's Avatar. And this was just such a perfect marriage of the two, two iconic films combined into one documentary. I think that's truly historic. And this, from a filmmaking point of view, this is just masterful storytelling all the way, supported by very appropriate camera work. And let's just take a moment to appreciate the fact and remind ourselves that everything was shot while free diving, which means that the camera people, Craig mostly, and whoever else was doing a little bit of camera work, because somebody was also shooting Craig, it was all done without breathing apparatus. I mean, this itself is incredible. And then you have to remember that these are frigid waters, and these guys were not wearing wetsuits. I mean, this is just mind-boggling to be in that kind of cold water that you would think would turn you into a state of hypothermia. And people are free diving with no clothes on, except for their trunks, of course. It's just, to me, a landlubber, it's just mind-boggling. And these are some of the wildest seas in the world too. And obviously there are currents, people are being buffeted. So you're holding your breath, you're freezing to death, and you're being thrown around by currents. And yet you're holding the camera steady. Your composition is perfect. Your exposure is spot on. Your focus is perfect, because when you are shooting on 4K or even HD, just a millimeter off this way or that way, and it looks soft. So what an amazing filmic achievement. And if any one of us wants to just get a tiny inkling of what this might be like, just try filming any creature on land while holding your breath for 2 or 3 minutes, while ensuring all this perfect focus and proper composition and all that. And then imagine doing all that in a freezing cold place without your clothes on, and while being buffeted by a tremendous wind. So, I mean, this is a huge achievement just in terms of its cinematography. And the fact that it didn't win many more awards in widescreen was because the categories were very limited. So we thought, well, the best of festival says it all. So there's no need to give it any more awards, especially when other films also have to get a chance in a film festival, right? So again, Swati, congratulations on an incredible film. I have more to say, but I won't dominate the discussion. If there's a little bit more time, I'd like to come back to some of the behavior because I'm also a naturalist, and I read my first book on animal behavior by Aubrey Manning when I was, I think, 14 years old. And that book is still on my shelf. And the kind of animal behavior that's depicted in this film is just, again, path-breaking, something very, very new. I'll just say put 2 or 3 things out. The octopus using something as a shield, was just amazing for me. And then it grows horns. We all know that octopuses camouflage themselves by changing color and all that. And there was an incredible crab kill and a lobster kill where there was so much strategic thinking. I mean, certainly the brain is not where we think it is. For the octopus, it's all over its body and it's 8 tentacles and it's just fantastic. And then the octopus walking on 2 legs, right, on the ocean floor. That was amazing. And then like an old lady in a dress. I mean, these were all every single moment. And I can tell you that when I was judging for most of the films, I wrote maybe 3 or 4 lines or at the most 1 page. And for the octopus teacher, I think I have about 6 or 7 pages of notes. So, I have much more to say, but I'll let other people speak as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shekhar. That was wonderful listening to you. There's so many things that came to my mind also. Professor Biju, do we have the others?
Dipani joined in between, and then she is not in full range, and she may come back, and then we'll start continue the discussion, and let us see whether she can also join.
Okay.
And,
so to come back to you, Swati, I was thinking you talked about telling stories and how essentially you wanted to be storytellers of the ocean and its ecology. But I was also thinking it's not a simple story. This is a story that uses multiple languages. It's not a story that can be told in one language. At one level, you have a visual language to tackle. At another level, you have an affective language that also needs to be in place. At another level, you also have an ecological, language that you should be thinking about. So there are different languages that have to be mapped onto the terrain of storytelling. And I was wondering, how you managed to do it. What kind of equipment, what kind of techniques did you use so that one did not jar and create noises in the other?
So one of the big things in the film when we started editing it was initially Craig wasn't in the film. So he was narrating his experiences, and because there was so much that we had, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of footage, over 6-7 years of filming, and we had thousands upon thousands of hours of film, all interesting, fantastic, both the animals and the ecosystem in the kelp forest. So obviously now from that mass kind of all of that we had to now pull it down to a film. But we knew that the heart of the story was Craig's relationship with the octopus. But when you're editing, obviously you have 2, 3, 4, 5 different versions when you're telling a story that keeps coming until you refine it further and further and further. So one of the things that one of the earlier versions was very much Craig's voice. Craig wasn't really in the film. It was really about him talking about the experiences that he had while he was in the Great African Sea Forest. But then very quickly doing that, we realized that we had to have him in the film actually telling the story, because this whole story that was the whole point of the story, was that relationship. So how do you, so it changed very quickly from that voice of God kind of narration very much into more. But now we had him in the film talking to camera a lot and everything in different, but how do you still tell that story in a way? So this is where our co-director James Reed came into play, and he was brilliant at doing these interviews, and he sat with Craig over a period of 3 days. He and Pippa, and basically James interviewed Craig, and it's from that long interview that Craig did, where he was questioned about everything from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, that it was from that material that the main story actually formed. So that was our first big kind of step, is to make it intimate, to personalize it, to put Craig in the film. So that was one. The other was, now Craig is a human, and obviously as human, you spend time on land and in water. And we wanted the entire film to be an immersive experience. We didn't want at any point of time for the viewer to be jarred out of the intimacy of the film. But some of the shots are underwater, and then you see Craig, shots of Craig outside of the water as well, just to establish him and where he was and what he was going through, and et cetera, et cetera. So we had this fantastic camera person for land called Warren Smart, who has this ability to work with light in a way that's just incredibly unique. So he specifically shot Craig on land and used the light like you would use light underwater. So it's almost like a dreamscape, and it's like, so you don't feel that jarring thing of now you're in water, now you're on land. Now you just get drawn into that story, and you go in and out as seamlessly as a free diver will. You're in water when you need to be, you come out, you take a breath, you're on land, then you go back, into the water. So visually, we try to do that. As Shekhar said, the camera people, phenomenal. That's why we had Roger Horrocks as the director of photography. He's a BAFTA-winning, Wild Screen Award-winning camera person who's done a lot of camera work underwater for Blue Planet and Planet Earth and all these big. And he's mainly an underwater camera person. He's a very, very good friend of Craig's. In fact, it was Roger and Craig who, with Craig's brother, made the 3 films on the crocodiles I spoke about, which Craig had done. And Roger did those films with Craig. So they have a very, very good understanding. And that's very key. Underwater, to understand each other like that and understand the environment and understand what's happening. Because if you have to stop and instruct your camera person, now shoot or point there, or I want this shot, you're not going to get it. You had to have someone who worked with you seamlessly, that they knew what they would get or expect. And because Craig understood the animal behavior so well, and because Craig understood his environment so well, and he knew what he had to do underwater, he could sort of predict a little bit about what was going to happen. And Roger could understand that and follow with his camera off the shots that you see of Craig in the water, of course. A lot of the filming Craig did because a lot of the times he was in the water by himself. There'd be days he'd just go in to swim, and then something would happen. And then he would just position the camera in a space near her den and on a wide shot, and you'd get those shots of him and her together. Some of it he did. Then of course the octopus itself, both he and Roger, Craig shot a lot of it, and then Roger shot quite a bit of it as well. So it was all of that. So and the thing is, everyone on this crew, the immediate crew. So there was Roger and Craig, there was Warren, there was Pippa, James, me, Craig, Ellen, our executive producer, Sarah Adelson from Netflix who came in. Everyone had, in fact, Sarah Adelson from Netflix who came in, she came to Cape Town after they chose to do the film for Netflix, and Craig took her into the water without a wetsuit. She's the executive producer from Netflix, and he made her experience the kelp forest and swim in that cold water. And he took her tracking and showed her other octopuses, not this octopus because she had obviously died by then. But it gave Sarah an idea of what it was about. So when Sarah went back and helped us refine the story, she then came from the same space that we were coming from, because she'd been there, she'd experienced what we were experiencing on a daily basis. So the whole film was a very intimate space in which it was made. Everybody knew everybody, known, like Ellen, our main executive producer, she and Craig worked from his first film, The Great Dance, more than 35 years ago now. So they've had that relationship. Pippa practically lived, breathed, and ate for 4 years here in this house. They worked out of a little room in my house. So it was because of those, the sound, something that people don't, like the incredible work that Barry Donnelly, our sound artist, did. He came day after day after day with Craig. He dived without a wetsuit, went into the kelp forest to experience it, listened to what kind of sounds he could hear underwater, brought his crew to the beach, recorded the sounds exactly, created those exact sounds in the studio. You see the levels of sound, which is why a lot of it also feels, that experience, you feel like you're underwater because of all that, what Barry did with the sound. And then Kyle, our colorist, who sort of matched all the colors and did the work of making it look exactly the way that it looks underwater. Because imagine now you have 7, 8 different cameras, different formats, different things. You need to bring it all together technically also to make it work. And everybody, Kevin, who did the music, the music was just unbelievable. And, Kevin used to come and sit here, and Kevin's done all the music for almost now 10 years for our films. Kevin's been doing the music. So he understands how Craig thinks, what Craig wants, the kind of, and Pippa sat with Kevin hour after hour after hour, scene after scene, deciding on how the music should go. So my son Tom contributed to the music as well. He did 2 of the soundtracks. He did all of the drone shots that you see in the film. So it was a small crew, but a very intimate crew who we were all friendly. We all knew each other, and everyone swims or has experienced this water. And some of them, like Kyle, for example, our colorist, now swims every day in cold water without a wetsuit in the kelp forest, because he's so absolutely hooked after this film. It's changed his life. And he's like, he can never go back to not swimming. So that's what this film was like. All of us, I grew up in Chennai. We didn't have a culture of being in the ocean. I was terrified of water because I nearly drowned as a child. My first 10 years in Cape Town, no, not 10 years, I would say about 6-7 years in Cape Town, from about 2008 to 2013-14, I barely went into the ocean because I was so scared of the water. But if I did go in, I'd go in a wetsuit, a life jacket, only in low tide, into the shallows, and very quickly realized the kelp was my friend, because it felt like a flotation device or a raft, where I felt like I could just cling on to it or lie on top of it if I got very nervous. And then slowly, just by watching Craig and Pippa and everyone and seeing this footage, and they'd come back with stories every day and being so inspired by what they were seeing, and then becoming part of the Sea Change project. And in my life as a journalist, I've never phoned in a story. I've never done a story that I haven't gone into the field and actually experienced myself. That's when I've done the story. So I thought, how can I talk about ocean conservation if I don't experience this environment for myself? So I would go in again in wetsuit and life jacket. The Sea Change team would go in with me. They would all swim with me, and slowly now I go in no wetsuit. I go in every day, sometimes on my own. I'm in the water every single day. It doesn't matter. I'm adapted to the cold, and I just absolutely am obsessed and love this ecosystem. So all of us, it changed all our lives in the process of making the film. And I think that's part of what people are subliminally or subconsciously also picking up from the film, is the actual kind of joy and immersion and deep ecology that we feel in this ecosystem that got translated, I would say, into how this film was made. It was a product of a hive mind, in a sense, as Craig keeps saying. It was all these minds together made this film. So it wasn't just Craig or just Pippa or it was all of these minds together. So I think that's why it flowed in the way that it did. And right through the process, as I said, for us, that the joy of nature, the inspiration it brings us to be in this water every day, the absolute passion that we feel for this ecosystem, the wonderful, quirky, extraordinary lives of all of the animals that we see every day, not just the octopus, every single animal in that ecosystem, even a tiny little, mollusk in a shell, a top shell, for example, just its little life and what it does to feed and survive and get on with life. And you look at that and look at the intense, involved, detailed lives they lead. It's absolutely extraordinary. It brings me hope every single day. As to Sanjay's point, for example, when he said, "Is those of us who do this every day and we do conservation," and as Shekhar knows, I mean, he, like so many places that he's filmed where he's literally seen destruction happen with mining and then helped save it with his films, and seen life come back or gone back to a place where he used to know, which was absolutely pristine, and seen it being degraded. We deal with a lot. Like, it's, as one conservationist actually said, she said, "I've gotten to this job because I wanted to record life." She's like, "Now all I do is literally put out death lists. This species is dying or that species is endangered." And she says this was making her so depressed that she has gone into formal therapy for it. There's a whole term for it, I think, now in psychology. We call it psychoterratica. This is that kind of displacement or despair that you feel in this weird kind of disconnect that we're living with nature, right now on the planet. So for us, being in this ecosystem every day actually inspires us, gives us hope, gives us joy. So all of that, I think, became part of what we were trying to say with the film. So, I think that's why it also appealed on levels to people which they may not have articulated themselves, apart from the obvious of what they enjoyed. But I think there were certain things like that came through the film that people, interestingly, the number of people we have who approach us, who use this film for mental health therapy and issues, and in places where they work with people with anxiety, depression, trauma, all of that, which was extraordinary that it, they would use the film for that. Children, we had so many parents write to us about their children who had ADD and autism and all of that, and they said they've never seen their child sit still for 90 minutes and watch a film like they did this one, which it just blew them away. This was a child who was bouncing off the walls, and they could not understand how this kid got so obsessed with the film that he would actually just sit there and like watch it. We got artwork from all over the world, children drawing octopuses and fish and starfish, and just the most beautiful artwork. Adults, phenomenal artists sending us the most extraordinary artwork from around the world, just sheer passion. It just inspired them to, this woman in England did the most extraordinary set of coloring books, but I can't tell you how absolutely exquisite some of those artwork panels are, and she's put her time and effort into it, and all of the proceeds of the sale of the book goes to Sea Change. I mean, who does that, right? Like, just not ask, nothing, out of the blue. She did it because she loves the film. So we've gotten a lot of responses like that, and that's really what's blown us away in a sense, and also kind of inspired me to think that we're at a space now, as we know, especially with this new COP report that's come out and everything, that, code red for humanity. And we know, any of us in this field know things are pretty bad, but somewhere also I feel like somehow for the first time, I feel more people are awake, at least, to this reality. Somewhere they're connecting with this idea that this is a problem, and there are a lot more people sensitive to it. You can agree with veganism or vegetarianism, or no judgment on who eats what at all. But I'm just saying, for people to even in their heads say, okay, I'm going to go vegan because this will help the planet. That's a huge step for people to take, especially if your diet's been very, very different for the longest time. Yes, of course, a lot of these choices we're making is also, we're talking about those of us with the privilege of making choice. We're not talking about people who don't have, the capacity to make those choices. The other thing is in the film, one of the things that, I think, this whole idea of story and emotion is not something we came up with. It's not like we created this wonderful story and we stepped forward and this was some new invention. This is something, storytelling is so intrinsic to who we are as human beings, because everything we do is a story. What I know about you is a story. What I tell myself about myself is a story. I'm a story in my own head. Everything around me is a story. The systems that we've set up, be it politics, be it the economic system, be it whatever, religion, it's all a story we've told ourselves. And the power of understanding that it's just a story and that you can change your reality by changing the story is an extraordinary realization to come to. So I think that was also part of, and that was very much, of course, from indigenous wisdoms. It's not some new discovery that we've come up with. And I think one of the things we did think about a lot when we were doing the film, especially because Craig had spent so much time with the San people, was this idea that in the world today, there's been so much epistemicide, this absolute murder of indigenous wisdoms and knowledge. For me, I personally think science would have been 100 times ahead of where it is today, if only science and indigenous wisdoms had, or science had acknowledged a lot of science was based on indigenous wisdoms, or brought indigenous wisdoms into that space. And I think that that's a huge loss to humanity in a sense, because we've ignored that massive part of knowledge and experience and lived experience. And I think so, bearing that in mind also, we stretched some of the things that we did with the film, because we're like, hey, if you're a human and you've experienced something, that ought to be as authentic as some researched thing that you put down as data, and you look at it from an empirical point of view, if you can replicate it or not. If you've lived it, if you've experienced, if you've seen it, then it should be authentic. So, that was another thing we brought into the film. So these were some of the sort of things that we all as a team worked on and brought in to tell the story. Yeah.
Thank you, Swati. I think that organic bonding was very much a signature of the film. To come back to what you said, I was mourning my two dogs. I had lost them to the virus, And I watched the movie at a time when I was into a deep personal crisis, because I was deeply depressed by the loss, and it did help me a lot in coming back to life, with a certain kind of a hope. So thank you for that on a personal note. Dr. Biju, should we be opening it up to the audience? Are there questions?
Yeah. And before that, I just wanted to add something, because I am a marine biologist who also worked with octopuses for a while. My student who also, PhD student who also did their PhD on octopuses is also here. And then when I saw the film, it was just like a wonderful storytelling. And the point Swati raised here is very, very important. The way in which, we are actually in a land where storytelling is the whole business, right? From the days of Ramayana, the whole storytelling was the way in which we communicated. But in between, we lost the whole way in which we told the story. And also, this film reminded me of the Russian short story, The Winter Oak, by Yuri Nagibin. Yeah, and then the way in which the teacher Anna was actually worried about the schoolboy Sauskin, and then one day when she was actually nervous because he was not listening to the class and she was handling English grammar. And then she was actually planning to complain this to his mother, and then the boy took the teacher to her home, to his home. And on the way, while traveling through the forests, and she realized that the boy knows everything about the forest. And she, as a teacher, she realized that she knows only the English grammar. And this was actually the scenario when I watched this film. And I was working with the octopuses, their taxonomy. I described a few new species of octopuses from India. And then I finally found that I am just like the teacher Anna, and Craig Foster was Sauskin while I watched the documentary, My Octopus Teacher. And then this animal definitely is intelligent, because when me and Shrija, then we worked on the behavior of octopuses, we realized that this animal was intelligent. And then when we read the Peter Godfrey's book on the octopuses, the sea, the deep origin of consciousness, then we realized that this animal definitely is more intelligent than any other invertebrate animal. And then when we handled the coconut octopuses, and then when we found that this animal is is capable of defending itself by picking up the stones even from the aquarium. And then when we put the coconut shells, she can actually collect the shells and make her home. And then finally we saw that one fine morning she laid. We never realized that she was going to lay the eggs, and she laid the eggs inside the coconut shell. And after, when the eggs hatched out, she died. So there's a lot of connectivity there. And then we realized that this animal definitely is a wonderful animal. And there were so many stories about the octopuses, including the false way in which the intelligence is depicted when this Paul octopus was actually employed for picking up the winner in the football match. Okay, so then ultimately, when the movie came out, we realized that as it taught me a lot of lessons, and especially the more important sense is that the way in which the role of an animal in an ecosystem. It could have been for a Craig or the team. It could have been a shark, because when we teach marine biology, we say that this is an indicator species, or the keystone species, etc., etc. Yeah. And then ultimately we realized that this, of course, as an animal which of course is very intelligent, and it can tell the stories to us that the only dharma of that every animal has in this world is the dharma of existence. And then the whole process continues through the DNA to the offsprings. And that scene was something amazing, when we saw the new, when your son saw the baby octopuses, and the way in which the whole inheritance continues, and also bringing the young generation to carry forward and look the real world, because we are now living in a digital world where people often fail to be in the real world. And that is why this film is so important. And it also, as even though we were the octopus taxonomists or biologists, we understand that this kind of organic connectivity is something very, very important in science as well. When we communicate science to the public, this connectivity is more and more important, and also bringing in the next generation to carry forward the old message. And that's also very, very important. That's why I like the film.
May I just jump in
Yeah.
with a few things to add to what Swati said? She was talking about sound. And of course, we are so seduced by the images because we are visual creatures, basically, that very often in a film, we don't notice the sound. And there were so many magical moments, but one of them, which was really ethereal for me, was at one stage, you can hear the sounds of humpback whales coming through the water. And that was just so surreal. And there's something about whale song, which is just incredibly moving, even though you don't understand that language. So that was something very special for me. And you were talking about your son Tom's drone shots. And there was one shot where the drone is filming Craig as he's swimming, and then he goes underwater. And there's some birds that pass between the drone and Craig, you know. So that was just incredible to see these birds going underneath, you know, a bit sandwich between the drone and Craig. And you were talking about the topside cameraman, the person who shot all the stuff on the land. And I saw what a creative eye he had, because even ordinary things were transformed to something extraordinary. There's at 43 minutes, 37 seconds, there's a reflection of Craig and Tom in the window glass. You know, it could have been a very ordinary shot, which was just shot head on, but it was instead shot as a reflection of them in the window. So there were all these little gems. And of course, there were all these incredible scientific facts as well. For instance, this thing about to kill a mollusk, the octopus has to drill a precise point in the shell and deliver venom to the adductor muscle. I mean, this is a film that you must watch, I think, 3 or 4 times. I've only seen it twice. I wanted to give it some space before I see it 1 or 2 more times, because there's so much to learn, so many little things packed in 90 minutes. So incredible.
So to speak to Shekhar's point about the behavior and all of that, also to Dr. Biju's point. So in the film, apart from the team that made the film, we had Dr. Yanis Lanskov, who's a colleague of mine at Sea Change Project, who's been very much involved with Craig in exploring the Great African Sea Forest. So he was an advisor. We had Professor Charles Griffiths, Craig's mentor, the Professor Emeritus from Cape Town. He's probably an absolute doyen of marine biology and a superb naturalist. You know, he's written the Two Oceans book, and he's discovered, I think, 300 species in his lifetime in the waters here, an extraordinary man. And he's the one who mentored Craig and taught Craig about this environment and taught Craig about how to recognize the animals and the behavior. So Prof. Griffiths was very much, you know, part of the whole thing. And we had Professor Dr. Jennifer Mather come from Canada. She's only one of very few octopus psychologists on the planet. And so a lot of the behavior, the quirks, you know, especially with the poses, and when we describe what she's trying to do with the poses, that was purely from the science of studying how octopuses. So it's not like we've come up with those things. It was Dr. Jennifer Mather who studied octopus psychology. And so we had very, very strong scientific team, you know, vetting everything that we did with the film. It was only in the spaces where we purely went out and showed it from an intimate, lived it, experienced, intimate relationship space that we said we're going to keep that, because that is, if someone experiences, then it's true. But the basic why it worked was people could then buy into that more sort of esoteric interpretation of something, because you already had a scientific base which was supporting you on the things that you had already established. So both those things came very much into play.
There are any comments from the audience?
I think there are a few hands raised, and if the admins can, yeah. Dr. Suvarna.
Hello, good evening all. I'm Dr. Suvarna. It was a magnificent movie, and hats off to Craig, and congrats to directors and producers as well. Now, simply, actually, no words to say. Such an amazing movie, showing the strong bond between an octopus and human being, and the stunning kelp forest and all that. And we all know that octopus are brainy, but they are lovable too. No, as Swati said, without Craig, this movie wouldn't have been so incredible. And even though at times Craig is outside water, we can see that his mind is still underwater. Absolutely right. No jarring at all. So you got several academic awards for the movie. Now, does the backdrop of awards received will be a challenge for your next film?
Yeah, it depends on if you're going to let it play with what you do. So, as I said, Craig's been making films for a long time. So his first film, The Great Dance, for example, was also won the Golden Panda at Wild Screen. So
Okay.
he won the Golden Panda for his first film. Didn't win the Golden Panda after that for any of the films that he did, even though he got nominated for several other awards and won other awards. And then for this film, he won the Golden Panda again. The movie, the first film that he made, which was The Great Dance, missed the Oscar deadline by a day and a half, and so it couldn't be entered for the Oscars. And this was, I'm talking about 30 years ago. And now this film got entered for the Oscars, and we won. So awards are as Shekhar knows, and he's been a judge and he spoke about it, it's subjective, it's strange. Sometimes, yes, maybe you get these unanimous decisions in certain films because they are just at that point different. But the Academy Award, for example, we were up with 4 fantastic social documentaries, very, very powerful stories, all of them brilliant filmmakers. All those films were absolute gems. So at that level, if any film won, it's a winner. It doesn't really matter which. It matters, of course, in terms of when people see it, which film wins the Oscar. But from just you step back from the award, any of those films were brilliant films. Actually, most of the films that were on the nomination list before the shortlisting were all brilliant films. So you can't get caught up in the awards, because then either it'll paralyze you and you'll never make another film in your life, or you'll be trying to play to trying to get an award, in which case you'll make an inauthentic film. So the only thing you can do with the film is stay true to your story. If the story inspires you, if the story is something that you're passionate about, if the story is something that you feel you need to tell, regardless of what genre it's going to fit or not fit, or who it's going to please or not please, you just have to do it. It has to be authentic. So that's the only actual rule that there is.
Yeah. Okay. So any project you are working on right now?
Not a film project, because, it takes time to come up with anything that's worth like a story like that. It takes a lot of time. So right now what we're working on is more within the Sea Change project is a lot of the conservation work. So we're working towards the long-term conservation of this ecosystem, which is the Great African Sea Forest. Craig and Dr. Yanis, who I mentioned, are working on describing 1001 species in the kelp forests, but in a very different way, very much to do with science, but also very visually with films and video, but also tell personal stories of each of those animals. So you will not only have a scientific idea of what those animals are, you will also get a story, an anecdote of who those animals are. So, to combine storytelling and science, they're working on this project. It's called the 1001 Species Project. And then you have we're working on a Forest of the Seas expedition, really, where there's a ship that will be sailing to all the kelp forests of the world. We're in partnership for this. There's a team doing that with the scientific team. What we are interested in as the Sea Change Project is to tell the stories of the forests of the seas. As I said, kelp forests cover 1/4 of the world's coastlines. Most of them are quite unknown. Many of them are quite fragile. Climate change, kelp forests are the second most fragile, how shall I say, the second most affected ocean ecosystem next to corals when it comes to climate change. So, and there's so little known about them, so little known about what are the forests of the sea. So this expedition will sort of be a story of these forests of the sea. So these are 2 sort of big projects. We're also hoping to start a podcast, the Sea Change Project podcast, called the Wild Language Podcast, where we will talk about everything from deep ecology, nature immersion, hard science, storytelling, philosophy, ethology, ecology, just covering a gamut of things that we're interested in when it comes to nature, and to have these nature conversations, which we think are really important. So these kind of things we're working on. And of course, we're in the water every day. We're filming every single day. We're recording every single day. And who knows, just like with my Octopus teacher, maybe a couple of years down the line, we look through our footage and realize, oh, we have a story, and maybe we'll make another film. But for now, no. But we might start also putting out small little animal behavior type small films on our YouTube channel. We haven't yet come up with how to do that, because everything needs a good story. But that is also sort of something that we're thinking about doing. Yeah.
Okay, that will be extremely helpful for conservationists, and especially will become a study material also. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a question. I think it's by Chandra. And see, when the team and the crew enter into the system, are we not actually entering into their private space, or do you have a feeling like that?
Yeah. So see, that is what we're talking about as that divide. That's a very human divide in our heads, and that's actually a divide that only urban humans have. You speak to most indigenous peoples around the world, local communities, forest dwellers, tribals as we call them in India, wherever you go in the world, they only call an ecosystem a wild place if a human is in it. They don't understand what a wild place means if you don't have a human in it. It's kind of like saying, if a human has never been to a place, you'll never know that place existed. Doesn't mean that that place doesn't exist. There are many parts of the world people still haven't gone to, and of course those places exist, but we don't know, what they look like, what they do, what they don't do. So in the indigenous cosmology, mostly anywhere in the world, they don't see that divide at all. In fact, I had a wonderful interview with this gentleman who is from Australia, an Aboriginal gentleman, and I was trying to ask him this question about the human divide from nature. I was trying to ask him, in the modern world with our technology and all of it, we're so separated from nature. Like, what does he have to say about that? And he actually didn't understand what I was trying to say. And I thought perhaps it was a translation issue, that I wasn't speaking his language and his English wasn't so good. But it wasn't a translation issue. He actually didn't understand what I was trying to say, because he couldn't understand how we could be separate from nature. Finally, he just stopped me, made me sit quietly, and he pointed to the sky, and he pointed to the river, and he pointed to a bird. And then he said, sky, river, bird, land, me, same. Maulaja, he used the word, he said family. He's like, this is family. He's like, if you desecrate that, you desecrate this. So I don't understand. So he literally didn't understand. So that is that idea that wilderness is something that is wilderness, and human is something that's human, and it's their space and our space. That's just something that is, I would say, 90% of the problem on the planet, and why we are where we are right now. Where it becomes important to keep that in mind is to understand that you have entered a space from a perspective of you still belong there, because as a human animal, you belong anywhere, but that each animal and every plant has a right to existence, a right to life, a right to lead its life in the way he or she chooses to lead their life. So you don't go in there and mess around with them. You go in with that respect, with the humility, with the understanding that you're sharing these spaces with all of these fantastic beings. It's not your space, it's everybody's space. So it's kind of like you won't walk into your neighbor's house and make an ass of yourself, hopefully. None of us should. You'll respect that that's their space, but it doesn't mean that you're not welcome to walk in. So it's that kind of thing where we need to understand that these are shared spaces, and as fellow beings, we all belong here. And I think we have to remember we belong here, because every bit of food we eat, every bit of water that we drink, every bit of air that we breathe comes from this natural world. Whether we think we can do without it or not, we can't. We just can't. So I think that's but it's a good question, because I think especially when it comes to filmmaking, to have those very ethical lines drawn where you don't harass the animal, you don't chase them, you don't go force an animal to do something he or she doesn't want to do. All of that, definitely there are ethical rules that absolutely must be followed.
If I may add something to that, I think it's well brought out in the film also, where Craig does not interfere with the animal a couple of times, and he just let it be in terms of when it's attacked by the shark, or when it's about to die, and all those different instances where he says that he wants to, but stays away. I think that's a very important takeaway from the entire filmmaking, from this perspective especially.
Yeah, does the fame actually bring in some kind of political awareness in South Africa? That's because the president also complimented the team. and whether that has driven some kind of conservation initiative in protecting the kelp forests?
So yes, so it was great that the president congratulated us. We also managed to get our book to him, the book that we did on the kelp forest, and he's very kindly responded post that, saying that he absolutely loved the book and is, so from that perspective, yeah, winning these awards, I must say, one thing it does for you, it opens certain doors that you normally you wouldn't be open to you. So of course you win an Oscar, and then suddenly your circles of separation become very small. So you can call person A to get in touch with person B. So that definitely is an advantage. We are working slowly on trying to get certain things put in place, but South Africa has a lot of challenges. Firstly, the scars of apartheid are horrific, because what apartheid did was it took away the pleasure of being, for example, generations of South Africans were banned from being on the beach because of their skin color. It was purely only white people were allowed, for example, on beaches. So what that has done is it's cut generations of South Africans off from what is their marine and natural heritage, horrific. So those kind of things are massive, massive scars. And then finally, when apartheid ended, there's been a lot of, I guess, graphs and corruption and mess around who got licenses to fish and who didn't and all of that. So there's a lot of, that kind of issues around the fishing here. So anytime you mention something like a marine protected area, it becomes a big problem because it goes back to apartheid, where for the local poor communities, they see it as them again being cut off from a space where only then recreational white people go in and swim or dive or do what they have to do. So it's a very, very delicate, sensitive issue. And I'm 100% understand why they would feel like that, because it's been very, very bad in this country. So anything that has to be done around marine protection has to be done by bringing together everybody and getting your stakeholders on board, every single stakeholder on board, actually. Also, South Africa is funny in that you don't have specific communities. Like there isn't a community that you can say is a community that belongs to the ocean. No. So it's very much who lives where and who has had access where and who is fishing. And then you have certain, of course, historically the artisanal fishermen and all of that who have there, but they spread out in a lot of places. So there's not like any one homogeneous community that belongs here or there. So it's a bit of a mess from that point of view. So it has to be done slowly. It has to be done sensitively. It has to be done with a lot of thought. It also has to be done with a lot of education, because unless they understand that by protecting the area and making it a no-take zone, it's not because you want to keep certain people out. You want to give that space time enough to recover, in which the feeder system from those spaces, with some of the fish being able to grow and breed without being interfered with or fish the whole time, will then feed into the larger ocean outside of the marine protected areas, making fish catches better. So, but if that message couched in that way, where the fishermen see it as something that will actually help them down the line, if it's not done like that, it's just an autocratic, oh, now you can't fish in this area anymore kind of attitude, you're going to get a lot of pushback. So yes, the president is interested. Yes, we have an ability to get to him with certain things, but it's a very complicated space in South Africa, and one has to approach it incredibly sensitively, because otherwise you could use a hammer and push something through, but it's not going to last for very long unless you get local community buy-in. So it's something that slowly has to be kind of worked on. And not just Sea Change, a lot of organizations, we're all working on it. But at Sea Change, the one thing that we believe very firmly is you don't point fingers at someone and say, you're the problem and I'm not, because we are all the problem, frankly. All our lifestyles, the way we live, the way we consume, what we do, we may not be directly doing something in the ocean, but everything we do is having indirect impact on the ocean. So, it's very easy to look at a fisherman and go, oh, you just killed a fish. But if you think of the hundreds of things that you did that day, you've probably contributed to a lot of fish dying. So it's one of those things where you try not to point fingers. And what you try and do is through stories, through communication, you try and you get the message across as to why it's beneficial for everyone, especially for his children, because fishing is not a future-proofed career at all, nowhere in the world, not in India, not in South Africa, as we know what's happening with our waters. So it's not future-proof. There is no guarantee that, you know, he can pass the skill on to his child. Industrial fishing, absolute scourge. That you can, you know, as a consumer, that you can fight that, that's a different issue. I'm talking about marine protected areas where communities are directly impacted. That cannot happen without all stakeholder buy-in. Yeah.
Can we call it a day? There are no more.
I think there's no more raised hands, so you can please.
Thank
Shekhar,
you
you
so
wanted to add something?
I have so much to add. Maybe I'll just take a minute because I just want to point out a few more things to the audience so that they can go back and rewatch the film. You know, at 52 minutes and 44 seconds, there's these brittle stars being drawn to the octopus feeding on a crab. You know, this was also a very special moment for me. And then at 46 minutes, 35 seconds, there was a miniature arm growing back, you know, and it's just amazing. You see geckos growing their tails back, but here you can see an octopus doing that. And then it's, you know, at 53 minutes, it's gently throws out the brittle stars out of the den with its suckers, right?
One by one.
It's just saying, hey, you know, don't crowd me, but it's not being aggressive to them. So this is an animal with so much character, you know, and that's something that just comes through. And I don't know how anybody can actually eat an octopus anymore. You know, we all knew they were amazing creatures, but here it's like such a sentient being. And, you know, God knows if you gave it a camera, it might have also contributed amazing camera work to the film. So perhaps next time that's something to think about. Give the octopus a little camera.
Like a little camera, yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. I mean, it's so great to have all of you appreciate it so much. It's really lovely to hear.
And also, Shekhar, there are something which actually marine biologists like us, we don't know. For example, an octopus playing with a school of fish. Because that kind of a behavior is not recorded at all, you know, among octopuses. So very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so many animals play, but we are so afraid to say that they're playing because we think we'll be branded as being anthropomorphic. But surely animals also do things for fun. We've all seen it when we go into the wild. We see animals having fun for the heck of it. You know, when it suddenly starts raining on a hot day and the deer start frolicking, they're just frolicking because it's fun. It's not some, you know, animal behavior that they're doing. The other thing that I really liked was when the octopus is being hunted by a shark, for instance, for the second time, it wraps itself in kelp leaves, you know, to hide itself from the shark.
Kelp basket.
And the shark then smells her and bites at the kelp. And then the octopus, of course, leaves the water and gets onto land. I mean, it's just incredible. I can go on for hours, but, you know, everything has to end.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Swati, Shekhar, Sanjay, Dr. Biju. It's an amazing session. I don't know. I don't have words to thank you, but I would also like to end, you know, as we began with stories, let's end on a poem. I was thinking of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind all along. I was thinking of that concluding stanza, make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. And suddenly Shelley changed. The Ode to the West Wind changed because I was no longer thinking of a forest on land. It was a kelp forest. What if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet though in sadness. Be thou, spirit fierce, my spirit, be thou me, impetuous one. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. And again, I thought of the octopus and its, you know, the way it died and that death itself brought on a new birth. And by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind, be through my lips to unawakened earth, the trumpet of a prophecy. That's what I wish that this film would do. It could be the trumpet of a prophecy. O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? So I think in this winter of ecological crisis, Nevertheless, there is a spring that I see, a spring that hopefully will follow. So let's hope for that spring, wait for that spring, but let this film be, I think, the trumpet of a prophecy where we would be profoundly more empathetic to the creatures around us, the animals around us, the world around us, and maybe learn to think of ourselves, as I said, as little eyes in this large cosmic, ecosystem that we are inhabiting. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very,
Yeah, thanks
very
for
much.
having us. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thanks. Bye.